So welcome everyone to one more speaker series from the Institute for Ethics and AI. My name is Caitlin Corrigan, and I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Ethics and AI at the Technical University of Munich. With its speaker series, the IEAI invites experts from all over the world to talk about ethics and governance of AI. These events serve as an important platform for sharing our new research and exciting knowledge on this topic. Since our launch in 2019, we've already run 41 speaker series events with distinguished guests from around the world, and today is no different. I'm very excited about this event. Today's topic will be looking at border security, opportunities and pitfalls, and we have the pleasure of having Maria Chiara Aquilino and Henri van Soest with us. Maria is a junior analyst at RAND, based at the Brussels office. She's primarily worked on the EU and UK Commission studies on violent extremism, EU security and defense policy, and climate change. Working primarily in RAND Europe, her research focuses on radicalization, extremism, and EU policies. In the past, she worked as a scientific research trainee in terrorism and violent extremism at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission and as a research assistant at King's College and Leiden University. She has a degree in international relations from King's College London and holds an MSc in crisis and security management from Leiden University. Welcome, Maria. And Henri is a senior analyst at RAND Europe and a professor of policy analysis at the Party RAND Graduate School. His two main areas of research focus on energy and national resource governments and AI governance. At RAND, he's managed studies involving global teams for a wide range of clients, including the European Union, UK government, and the Dutch government. He's also worked on space logistics, cybersecurity, and critical infrastructure protection, disaster risk reduction, and societal resilience. He previously worked as a researcher in energy policy and digitalization at the University of Oslo, and as an analyst in the clean tech startup sector. He completed his PhD at the University of Cambridge and also holds a joint LLM from KU Leuven and in Belgium and the University of Zurich. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. Thank you much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks. I think, Henri, if you can share your screen, we'll get started. Thank you for the introduction, Caitlin. Yeah, so thank you so much for having us. Today we'll be talking about artificial intelligence in border security, opportunities and pitfalls. I'll briefly introduce RAND and what we do. So this is us, Henri and I are based in the Brussels office of RAND. RAND was established in 1948. It is a non-for-profit organization that helps improve policy and decision-making through research and analysis, serving many public sector clients, as well as governments and international organizations to provide outputs based on scientific methods and rigorous research. Today, RAND is the world's largest policy research organization with approximately 2,000 staff working globally, including 150 in Europe, so across offices in the UK, the Netherlands offices, and Belgium. RAND was also ranked first globally among think tanks for defense and security, publishes hundreds of reports a year, and has been linked to 30 Nobel Prizes. Through the RAND School of Public Policy in California, RAND is also home to the world's largest public policy PhD program. So here you can see RAND's global footprint, as said, from the US to Europe, and we also have an office in Australia and Canberra. So RAND's Europe's Defense, Security and Justice Group works across different work streams on a diverse range of topics across defense, security and justice. And the most, I would say, relevant topics we focus on for this specific presentation are security and resilience, as well as crime and justice. And we use cross-cutting methods and a broad mix, I would say, of quantitative and qualitative approaches. So we'll provide an EU border security overview. Then I'll pass it on to my colleague Henri to give us an overview of AI systems in border security, opportunities and risks. So EU border security. Border security in the EU is a complex and evolving system focused on protecting the external borders of the Schengen area while also maintaining free movement within it. Who's the main actor? The main actor in this is the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, commonly known as Frontex, who plays a crucial role in managing and securing the European Union's external borders. Frontex was established in 2004 and headquartered in Warsaw, Poland, and it has evolved to become a key player in the EU border management. Its core functions, Frontex coordinates and develops EU border management strategies. It promotes cooperation between member states, ensuring a harmonized approach to border control. One of its primary tasks is conducting risk analysis and sharing intelligence, which helps in identifying patterns and trends in irregular migration and cross-border criminal activities. Of course, Frontex also deals with national border agencies who remain the main managers of the day-to-day border security in their respect. While Frontex provides supports and coordination, individual countries indeed maintain their own national border agencies. They're responsible for their respective sections of the Schengen area's external borders. So Frontex border guards supports and operates under the command of the national authorities, actually in the countries where they are deployed, ensuring a collaborative approach is set. Frontex also cooperates with EU agencies, among these Europol, so the EU's law enforcement agency, CEPOL, which is the European Union Agency for Law Enforcement Training, and OLAF, the European Anti-Fraud Office. Frontex also collaborates with international agencies such as Interpol to address global security challenges and facilitate information sharing on a broader scale. So as said, Frontex operates, supports more than anything on internal and external borders. As per the internal borders, the Schengen area, the passport-free travel zone, has been a cornerstone on European integration, allowing free movement within the Union across internal borders on participant countries. However, despite the Schengen agreement, some countries have reintroduced internal border checks. For example, most recently, Italy, Germany have done so in emergency circumstances due to irregular migration or migrant smuggling at borders. Looking at external borders and their protection, Frontex promotes, coordinates, and develops the management of these. And I will provide a brief overview of the structure of the EU external borders, which are divided on the base of their geographical location. So we have the eastern border, which includes land borders with countries such as Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, and Russia. These borders are significant for managing migration flows from Eastern Europe and addressing security concerns related to geopolitical tensions. There was, for example, a border crossing from example in Finland, so border crossing of refugees on eastern border, and more and more the trend of migrants being used as a threat to overwhelm border security. Then we have the southern border, which encompasses maritime borders in the Mediterranean Sea and the land borders with North African nations such as Morocco, Algeria. The border has key hotspots, which includes Spain's enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla, which have faced significant pressure for irregular migration. The northern border includes maritime borders in the Arctic region and land borders with Norway and Russia. So while there has been less activity in terms of migration flows, these are strategically important location for Arctic security. Last but not least, the western border includes maritime boundaries in the Atlantic Ocean, which is less, again, prominent for migration, but vital for trade and maritime security. So as you can see from the map, where is Frontex deployed? Frontex is deployed across various locations within and outside the European Union. As of January 2025, Frontex operations have been on EU external borders, as said, eastern-western borders, Greece, Cyprus, Italy, and Spain specifically as well. And the agency deploys officers and equipment to support border controls operations at land, sea, and air borders. Frontex is also deployed on non-EU countries, which have signed status agreements with the European Commission, including Moldova, Serbia, Montenegro, and Albania. There's also specific deployments, as I was mentioning before, Western Balkans, also the Black Sea region, Mediterranean Sea, including operations in Greece, Italy, and Spain. EU Eastern land borders, including Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, and Slovakia. And Frontex also deploys offices at EU and international airports to assist with border control and security checks. Africa and Turkey are also regions where Frontex is deployed. Actually, it has a network of liaison offices deployed in the regions to facilitate cooperation on border management issues. And the agency's operations are, of course, dynamics, and they change on the basis of current needs and risk assessments. Next slide, please. So the EU follows an integrated approach to border management underpinned by key legal frameworks such as the Schengen Borders Code. On external borders, Frontex supports member states with border surveillance. So member states get support with surveillance operations to monitor land, air, and sea borders. Database checks, so systematic checks are conducted using databases like the Schengen information systems to track individuals crossing these borders. And Frontex also deploys rapid intervention teams during crisis to assist member states to facing disproportionate pressures. Taking a broader look at what Frontex does, next slide, please. As said, Frontex supports border surveillance activities at external borders. It also has operations focusing on detecting and disrupting criminal activities such as migrant smuggling, human trafficking, and terrorism at borders. It conducts search and rescue operations during border surveillance missions, and the agency also helps member states gathering information at borders to assess risks, identify trends, and share intelligence with member states and other agencies. Frontex also supports member states in returning individuals who do not have the right to remain in the EU, promotes cooperation and information sharing between EU member states, Schengen associated countries, and relevant international organizations. The agency also works to modernize border control processes and implement new technologies to improve efficiency and security. And by supporting external border management, Frontex operations also aim to protect the integrity of the internal Schengen area and its freedom of movement. So the European Union borders, of course, face numerous challenges due to its also the unique geography and geopolitical situation of the EU. These challenges of different nature, for example, geographical. So the EU has an extensive external border, extensive external borders, and these present significant security concern as a result. So the long land borders shared with 21 countries and more with their sea borders, the vast Mediterranean Sea border in particular, and also the remote and difficult to monitor areas within the EU constitute a security challenge. Irregular migration remains a persistent challenge with fluctuating migration patterns, shifting routes and entry points, and overall an increased migration pressure in the long term. Recent data, for example, have showed that there has been a 38% drop in irregular border crossing in 2024, with total detections just over 239 million. However, there have been some routes that have peaked up actually. So 14% rise on the Eastern Mediterranean route, 18% increase in the Canary Islands, and a 192% surge along eastern borders, particularly with Ukraine and Belarus. Transnational crime and terrorism also represents a challenge, with persistent threats from smuggling networks adapting to new and emerging circumstances. Ongoing terrorism risks remain, requiring also constant vigilance. Operational challenges are also an issue, so strained resources in managing vast borders, coordination issues between multiple national and EU agencies, workforce challenges in recruiting and maintaining skilled border personnel. Political and social tensions also play a role in this, and of course they influence EU border security. So divergent views on migration, for example, across different EU member states. And migration remains still a societally sensitive topic. So this often means a polarized public opinion on the topic. Also, external dependencies can be a challenge for border security, so reliance on cooperation with non-EU countries for effective border management, geopolitical instability in neighboring regions such as Ukraine, Sahel, affecting migration flows, and the weaponization of migration by states like Russia and Belarus, which exert then a pressure on the EU borders. And also the internal borders reemergence, so the possibility of member states to ask in emergency circumstances to redirect resources and attention from external borders to internal borders as they implement more controls on the internal ones, indeed. Next slide, please. So as said, this is the current situation and how it shifted in the past year. We've seen less of a flow in the central Mediterranean sphere, where migration flows continue, but they have significantly reduced. Whereas, as said, movements have peaked up in the eastern land border and have been also used to exert pressure on EU borders. Overall, there have been key trends that have shaped the developments of the border security in the past years. So the EU has strengthened its border infrastructure with physical barriers and advanced surveillance technologies, meaning a sort of increased militarization on the technologies and the approach used, such as autonomous systems and cameras being used to strengthen physical barriers. And this has also come to raise some humanitarian human rights concerns. Frontex has also expanded since 2021. The agency has a standing corps of 10,000 border guards to provide consistent support across member states. And there has also been externalization of policies. So the EU has increasingly collaborated with non-EU countries, such as Turkey and Libya, to manage migration flows before they reach European borders. There also have been recent incidents that are worth mentioning. So again, as said, eastern border tensions, heightened tensions along the Belarus-Poland border due to orchestrated migration flows that have led to increased EU sanctions against Belarus. The Mediterranean migration crisis continued, as said, crossing from North Africa have resulted in numerous rescue operations, but also criticism over human rights violations during pushbacks at sea. And security challenges, reports of arms trafficking and organized crimes have increased at external borders, and these have prompted calls for stricter controls. Sorry. So this is overall a broad overview of EU border security, and then I'll pass it on to Henry to introduce us to AI and how that applies to European border security. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. So as you see, the landscape for EU border security is quite complex and in constant flux. And it's no surprise then that technologies like AI could be beneficial for improving EU border security. And indeed, AI technologies in the broad sense have a relatively long history already in the landscape of AI, European border security. So as you can see, all the way back in 2013, with the Smart Borders package, there was already a conceptualization of what digital border could look like, an initial assessment of which technologies could be used in that context to come to a digital border, and a discussion as well on what the benefits of that would be, mainly in terms of increased coverage and a reduction in cost and the efficiency gains that would bring. Then from 2015 to 2020, we have the initial technological development of these solutions once the conceptualization of the Smart Borders package started taking shape. We see the initial prototyping of AI solutions, integration of biometric data collection, for example, development of large-scale information systems and databases across EU border security, and increasing research into automated border control technologies. And then since 2020, we're really in a new phase, and this is similar to just the development and increased deployment of AI technologies in general, where we see this happening in EU border security as well. So a move away from the initial prototyping towards widespread deployment. Anyone who's taken a flight or the Eurostar recently will be very familiar with the automated passport control gates that are now very widespread. But behind the scenes, there's also a widespread deployment of algorithmic risk assessment of border security situations, and also more proactive monitoring of migration to attempt to preempt these shifts in migration trends that Chiara already talked about as well. And then, of course, research is continuing on other forms of AI deployment in EU border security as well. For example, work on emotion detection or more autonomous border security applications. So AI can have widespread uses across the EU border security landscape. We've identified 5 main areas or types of applications for AI in border security. So the first one is situational awareness and assessment. A big challenge with the long and complex European border is just situational awareness, being aware of what is happening and making sure that information from lots of different data streams and sources is captured and can then be synthesized. That leads to a number of concrete applications on the ground. So, for example, surveillance towers, there's satellite imagery as well, and other forms of radar and monitoring, which generates these data streams that are collectively assessed and analyzed. That's closely linked to the second main point in the taxonomy, which is information management. So there's lots of different data sources that are available in the EU border security landscape, held by different players, and AI can help integrate these different sources of data and try to lead to a collective analysis of this data to really draw out the insights that might be held in these different data sources. Next point is communication. So AI can help there as well in establishing communication between different border agencies and the data that they hold, or can help border security staff effectively get access to this data as well. For example, through AI agents that can act on a query and draw out the relevant information. The fourth main point of taxonomy is detection, identification, and authentication. So we've already talked about biometric information, for example, this computer vision here as well. So we see a deployment of more autonomous systems, drones, and underwater vehicles, for example, that do have AI-enabled capacities for enhanced detection, identification, and authentication. And finally, training and exercise. So this is one step back from the actual border security, but Chiara touched on the challenges of workforce and skills within the border security community, and AI tools can help, for example, in the simulation of environments, so that border security staff can engage in these simulations, train on certain situations before actually being deployed in the field, and in that sense, be more prepared for what they might face on the ground. So it's important to stress that while we talk about AI in first place in this presentation, AI is often coupled with other technologies. And that's indeed the case across the board in society, but it's particularly the case in EU border security. So on this slide, we've listed just a few technologies that are being deployed on the EU's external borders as well, and with which AI interacts to provide a more holistic approach to technology-enabled border security. So what are the challenges and risks of deploying AI in border security? Well, first of all, technology or AI is still in a relatively early stage, even though we've seen lots of progress recently, we can expect lots of progress going forward. Currently, we do still face data quality and accuracy challenges. We do have hallucinations in many common LLM models, for example, that remain to be addressed. We do have cybersecurity vulnerabilities as well, particularly when we're dealing with accessing databases of sensitive, very personal information, and AI agents, actors drawing information from these various databases and thus combining insights from these various sources. There's a general issue of algorithmic black box problems, the mechanistic interpretability of the AI models that are being used in the context of border security, and the potential for false positive and negative identifications, which are worrying in any context, but in the case of border security can have large personal ramifications for the people involved. Then there's operational risks as well. So the AI landscape is moving very fast. It is even for people active in the AI space, it is hard to keep up. And so for deploying these systems in EU border security context where people are not necessarily very much in tune with what's happening in the AI world, it could mean that there's an insufficient understanding and awareness of AI, what it can do, what it can't do currently among end users. So that could lead to a misidentification of appropriate use cases. It could lead to an over-reliance on technological solutions, and the lack of understanding of the downsides that it may bring. So we also currently see a lack of organizational capacity within border agencies to really think through what AI could mean for them, and also think through the potential ramifications. Then there's legal and regulatory challenges. So evidently, there are some challenges related to ethics and human rights when it comes to using AI and border security. Comprehensive governance frameworks are being developed, but in a general sense, and there's probably a need for a more targeted discussion on how these governance frameworks should apply in a border security context with all its specificities and peculiarities. And then, of course, balancing security needs with individual rights, which runs as a red thread throughout any discussions to do with border security, whether they involve AI or not. Data and privacy issues. These are also not new. So this is mass personal data collection, of course, in order to cross the border. There's always certain types of information that need to be shared, but this is a moment par excellence when data can be gathered on a particular individual. And of course, in order to train AI models, that is a very useful source of data. So there is a natural tendency, perhaps, to increase the amount of data collected, which can then be used as a source for training particular AI models in this context. And finally, strategic vulnerabilities. So it's very much in the news right now that Europe faces a competitiveness issue, doesn't really have an AI champion in and of itself. So there is a risk that if in the European context we are implementing AI solutions in border security, that we create strategic vulnerabilities to non-AI companies, and that we do not have technological sovereignty in a European sense over what technologies we deploy in border security. To dive deeper into the ethical challenges, so clearly there's issues of potential human rights violations, risks of racial and systemic bias and ethnic profiling. These are well known about in law enforcement, for example, as well in the use of AI algorithms in a policing context, and they very much apply in a border security context as well. Then there's a dehumanization of the migration process and a focus on process efficiency rather than humanitarian concerns. So because of the resource efficiency that AI models can bring, it reduces the need for human involvement. It can take the human out of the loop entirely already in some instances, which means that the human contact between migrants and border security staff is lost, so it could lead to a more dehumanized process, which does not take account of the particular context in which a migrant or someone trying to cross the border may find themselves, and their particular background. Finally, border security covers several different types of situations, which Chiara touched upon as well. We talked about irregular migration, but for example, transnational crime would also fall in the mandate of border security agencies. And these are clearly two very different situations from a humanitarian point of view. There may be an inclination to use AI-based approaches to cover both of these instances and just think about border security in the general sense. But the prospect of dehumanization of vulnerable people is significantly stronger in cases of irregular migration versus transnational crime. Mitigation strategies in order to avoid these potential ethical pitfalls include transparent AI development, human oversight mechanisms, continuous ethical auditing, and development of robust legal frameworks. Then I'll touch on the IEAI Act, which you are no doubt all aware has been voted through the European Parliament and is currently being implemented. And border security is actually a very interesting case. So border control mechanisms as such are classified as a high-risk system and thus come with several requirements on the IEAI Act, including a comprehensive risk management system and the need to supply adequate documentation and keep track of the background of a model. But there is an exception to the standard human oversight rules, which means that in particular contexts, border control mechanisms could be used without the human oversight that would apply in the non-border context. There's also a general national security exemption in the IEAI Act, which means that national security applications that relate purely to military or national security applications are excluded. But law enforcement applications, for example, would be covered by the AI Act. And this shows that border control mechanisms, depending on their exact framing, their exact deployment, could be covered either by the high-risk provisions of the IEAI Act or be covered by the national security exemption. So it really depends on the specific situation. What does this mean for the future? So the first thing is that we now have the EU AI Act legal framework, which provides an overall guidance. And so there will be continued deployment of AI technologies under this new guidance. But importantly, there is delayed compliance for large-scale migrant data systems and certain forms of automated risk assessment, which are currently already deployed and which will be deployed out to 2027 as well. So there's a cutoff there in 2027. Systems that are deployed before that date only need to comply with the provisions of the EU AI Act by the end of 2030. So general conclusions then. So we've seen that there's a combination of operational challenges, workforce issues, for example, and migration trends. For example, increased climate risk in North Africa that may make an increased use of AI in border security to a certain extent unavoidable. And we see this development playing out in practice. AI has already been deployed in EU border security for a number of years, but there's new forms of applications that are being researched and developed on a continuous basis. But AI as a normer covers a range of applications ranging from automated border security all the way to integrated autonomous surveillance. So it's a really broad field, and AI is often paired with other technologies. So AI governance needs to take account of that interconnection to other technologies as well. So taking into account these broad trends, of course, AI applications should be preceded by comprehensive risk assessments that include ethical dimensions and human rights. And these risk assessments could draw inspiration from the AI Act. Indeed, in some instances, in the case of high-risk applications, they need to follow the AI Act in any case. But a comprehensive risk assessment could also take place in applications that fall under the national security exemption, and really just to ensure that ethical dimensions and human rights are taken into account. And finally, an important point is that European border agencies don't necessarily have an understanding of AI applications at this point in time. But of course, if AI applications do become a more important part of their operational deployment, of the way in which they work, they should work to close knowledge gaps as well and really understand the impact of the AI applications that are being developed. Thank you. That was our presentation, and then I'm glad to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Henri and Henry. Really interesting, and I encourage everyone to submit some questions now to the chat. I'll start off while we're waiting for questions with maybe a more an optimistic question, because it wasn't there as much. Have you seen in your research or in your observations examples of how AI is improving the human rights or humanitarian situations at the border? Is it allowing us to process people faster, or more effectively? Or, I mean, maybe some examples of that, or potentials that you see where it may actually reduce bias or things among agents?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first is people who are regular migrants. We see the or people moving across borders with a valid passport, and there's no irregular migration, we see the benefits very clearly that these AI enabled border control systems do make the airport or train experience move a lot swifter, and it does help in that sense. Many of these AI applications are potentially could be both positive and negative. So we see systems being deployed in the Mediterranean, for example, for tracking small boats, which enables coast guards to respond to this, which could then be could be used either to rescue these people directly and bring them to safe harbor, or unfortunately, which we've seen previously, that that's being used to push back people to the point of origin. So in those cases, the AI system is a relatively neutral factor, and it depends on the Coast Guard policies on how to deal with that information. The point on a more effective processing of migrants is definitely a very interesting one. I don't currently have any examples that I am aware of, but definitely that is a case where there's clear advantages to using AI if it is used in an ethical way.
Yeah, it's interesting. The example also made me think of one of my other questions I wrote down was kind of this dual use of AI systems, and is there concern among either border security or policymakers about kind of the potential dual use of these systems and security around the systems getting into the wrong hands and things like that? Is that a talking point?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the first point in dual use is that many of the systems that are being deployed in a border security context have military origins and come from military or intelligence surveillance-based applications. So already there's an interesting dual-use context where the border security applications follow what may have been developed in a military context. But clearly, many of the applications that are used in border security could pose issues that they've fallen in the wrong hands. I think the privacy threat or the cybersecurity threat is probably as big as the AI applications themselves. So the fact that there's a lot of personal data that is being kept in databases, which may now become more exposed through AI-enabled cyber vulnerabilities, is probably as big of a threat as the actual dual use of the models that are being deployed themselves.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, I have a question here. Could you explain a bit more what is meant by emotional detection, how it works, the state of the art, but more so how it's used in border security? And I can imagine this has big ethical implications as well.
No, absolutely. And emotional detection indeed is the use of AI systems that look at biometric data to then determine someone's emotions, someone's intentions from non-verbal communication. So to really read someone's mannerisms to try and determine what someone may be thinking or what they're up to. And of course, this is fraught with ethical issues. I think in the European context, there is research is definitely being conducted on this and trying to determine from a scientific point of view how it could work in a border security context. I think that's a clear case where the ethical concerns are obvious, and that is being considered before these systems are being rolled out in practice. But yeah, it depends a bit on your personal perception, perhaps, how worrying it is that these systems are being researched, but that is in any case happening through various EU research programs.
Interesting. Yeah, I think go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to add that there was a case, I think a few years ago, I think 2018 or so, where there was this AI-based system for emotion recognition. I think it was called iBorder CTRL. And it was ideally it was going to be used to detect lies told at border security agents. But I think it became a case because it wasn't very transparent in the way it operated. And yeah, I do think that it was discussed at the European Parliament level for the lack of transparency, indeed.
Interesting. I had a question actually for you, Maria, as well. And it's okay if you don't know the answer, because I know that this topic was specifically about the EU approach to this, or what's being done on EU border control. But have you looked into or noticed any different approaches in different regions around the world, how they're interacting with technology for border control? Is it different in approach to Europeans or?
I wouldn't dare to say. I'm not very expert on non-EU AI and border control. Really, that matters. I don't know if Henri has any insight, but I don't. I'm sure. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Well, I guess one point is that AI systems have been deployed in the US context as well, for example, in the US-Mexico border. And it will be interesting to see now how that fits in with President Trump's new approach to US border security. We could imagine that we would see an increased deployment of these systems in the US context, but we'll have to wait and see how that actually plays out.
Yeah, and I can imagine as the IEAI Act goes into effect and kind of governance regimes around this are varying around the world, you might see a different interaction or limits or scope. I had well, another question about if there's any, because you mentioned bias, and obviously this is a major issue, and we're talking about things like facial recognition, but also just predictive analytics and any of those type of things. Has there been any kind of assessment already of the systems being used, and if, for instance, the false positives and negatives are following trends along certain populations or certain types of biases, or has that not happened yet?
So there's an issue which Chiara already pointed to as well, is that many of the details of the exact systems that are used are not public, and that's very much in the national kind of security umbrella. So there's been assessments of the false positives and negatives in a more general sense, and thinking about AI models in practice and how we might mitigate this. But in the context of the actual systems that are being deployed right now, I don't have any concrete details. That's very much not open in the public.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I wonder, before the event, we were discussing the AI Action Summit coming up in Paris, and if this kind of will be among the topics of public interest AI and the way governments in particular are interacting AI, a continuingly important topic. I had one last question, and please feel free to raise your hand as well if anyone in the audience has some questions. In terms of, you mentioned kind of the evolving kind of governance and regulation around this, and you said, we kind of had general frameworks now, but where do you see any of kind of, you mentioned the possible need for more targeted frameworks. Where do you see some of those gaps in particular?
Well, I think again the main challenge is that this is covered by national security concerns and this securitization of AI systems in this context, and we see how it's very much an edge case in the EU AI Act governance as well. So the main governance issue for me is really finding out where these systems lie in the context of national security. What would be allowable under national security, and where we should draw the line and say, even in a national security context, we do need to make sure that these things are guaranteed. And we see in the final result of the EU AI Act that there was some initial thinking on this, but I think that's a discussion that needs to continue among EU member states as new applications are developed as well. In different applications, as we mentioned, that balance might fall in a different way. I think with general AI governance, we talk a lot about international approaches, trying to make sure that approaches are harmonized. Again, because of the national security context, that's probably more difficult in a space like this, where it's primarily the different countries concerned that have to collaborate together, and not so much, for example, governance structures with the US in the first instance.
Yeah, the last point relates a little to another question that's popped up, and maybe Maria has some more thoughts on this, because you mentioned in your presentation that one of the problems is a kind of a fractured or differentiated view on migration within the EU, and how this might impact the way border security is approached. As that relates to AI, is there kind of trends you're seeing in the way different EU countries are approaching it, or is it more seen as a unified approach, or are there, kind of distinctive things that different countries are saying, yes, no, we need to prioritize this?
I would guess that it's still like as much as every country has like manifests the needs of taking a bit more control on their border, then it's also a matter of their vision of AI and the potential implementation on border security. And I would guess that it's also a very difficult stand on which to agree on unanimously. I don't have concrete examples of this, but I would imagine that as per the needs of each country, that would change, or the vision on implementation of AI in this on these matters. I would imagine that every country would have their own vision, and as at the EU level, there would be still the fragmented like fragmented opinions on this. Yeah.
And I would add that to a large extent, opinions on deployment of AI would follow general opinions on migration. So if, as a certain political current, you feel that there needs to be a crackdown on migration, you may be more inclined to accept certain AI enabled applications, versus if you're more accepting of migration, then you might think that more restrictions are needed.
Thank you so much. If there's no other questions out there, then I'll give my guests another round of applause for this really interesting conversation. And I have a few other announcements to make about our events. Our next event coming up will be at as a side event of the Munich Security Conference. We'll be hosting it on Friday, February 14th at 5:30 p.m. at the America House in Munich. It's titled, building off of this conversation today, there's actually kind of a reason we've paired these together. We're going to also be talking about automating human security, specifically moving over to conflict scenarios and thinking about the protections of civilians in conflict and what role AI is playing there. So again, this is an in-person event in Munich. The seats are already selling out, but so please register if you're going to be in Munich and can actually attend in person, since it'll not be held virtually. Additionally, on February 20th at 5:30 p.m. At the TUM Think Tank, again, another in-person event, the IEAI's researcher Oksana Boch will host an event From Insight to Impact, Mapping the Psychological Impacts of Interactional Technologies. So please look at our website to register for both of those, and we look forward to seeing you all in person, and hopefully to seeing Maria and Henri soon as well. Thank you again for everyone for your questions, and Henri and Maria for this really interesting discussion. I hope you all have a great rest of the day.